Hello and welcome, everyone. We're really glad to have you here today for our weekly OCI Deep Dive. For those of you who might be new to these events, we're hosted on Cloud Customer Connect, which is our Oracle community forum for end users. You'll see some links and resources that I'll share that will lead you back to those forums. And if you're not already a member, we invite you to create a free account, join in discussions, post questions, look for upcoming events on all kinds of topics. My name is Kenna Kettrick. I'm a program manager with the OCI Go-to-Market team. And today I'm joined by David Lapp, Senior Principal Product Manager, to take us through the latest updates to Oracle Spatial Studio. And I think that is enough from me. So David, it's all yours. Go ahead and take it away.
Thank you very much. And just quick confirmation, my screen is showing up okay?
Looks great. Yep.
Awesome. All right. Well, this is going to be really kind of an overview of Oracle Spatial Studio on Oracle Cloud. I'm definitely going to highlight and call out some of the new features, but I'm assuming that there's plenty of folks who really aren't familiar with Spatial or Spatial Studio, so I'm going to give sort of an overview, and we will have time at the end for sure for questions, and ask them on chat along the way at any time. So again, I'm David Lapp, Product Manager on the Spatial team, and let's jump in. So just to orient ourselves sort of at the highest level, the context here is spatial data and taking advantage of spatial data. So what this is all about, of course, is location. And this all starts with the fact that everything happens somewhere. So all of the information that we manage in our operational and analytic systems tends to relate to things that happen somewhere: incidents, events, activities, transactions. It all happens somewhere. And at Oracle, location is really just another built-in native data element in the Oracle Converged database, every Oracle database, alongside the other forms of converged data. So it's spatial, it's graph, it's JSON, et cetera, et cetera. All mainstream features of the database. So with Spatial, what that allows us to do is use the database to answer all kinds of location-based questions about spatial relationships and distances and areas and proximity, all kinds of location-based questions in the context of all of the other sorts of data interactions you have. And then ultimately to feed that into business applications so that they can be enriched with location-aware analysis and reporting and map visualization. So that's the big picture here. When we sort of drill down the next level into what that means for Oracle Database, and today for this session, Oracle Autonomous Database in particular, what that means is that we manage all forms of geospatial data natively in the database. So those are basic things like points, lines, and polygons representing geocoded addresses or utility lines or counties or flood zones, as well as other advanced types such as geospatial imagery, satellite imagery, that a lot of value can be leveraged from. Those are all stored natively in Oracle Database, whether it's Oracle Cloud, Autonomous Database, other database cloud services, Cloud at Customer, on premises, it all has spatial. And then once again, what that affords you is the ability to analyze and relate, tie data and information together based on location. So where are the nearest, for example, coffee shops to my location or to a particular train stop I'm going to be departing from? Which properties that I manage are at risk from being within or near a flood zone? What are sort of the proximity relationships between assets or properties that I'm responsible for and a predicted hurricane path? All these sorts of location and proximity related questions are just answered really as easily as other sorts of traditional queries that you would typically be performing in Oracle Database. So how is Oracle Spatial, the spatial features of Oracle Database leveraged? Well, there's a few main sort of categories of how it's leveraged. So you see at the top left under developers are the sort of the programmatic ways to directly access those features. And typically, and sort of the bedrock of this is using just native SQL, the same type of SQL you use for any other database query. It automatically knows how to ask all kinds of spatial questions. So SQL, PL SQL, and then broadening out from that the various APIs that are available, whether it's working with Java, with ORDS REST development in the database, so on and so forth. So a wide ecosystem of developer-oriented approaches. Over on the right is sort of the ecosystem of tools and technologies and partner solutions that all support our platform natively. So lots of people and companies and other products take advantage of the spatial features through that sort of third-party ecosystem. But then on the bottom left, we see Oracle Spatial Studio. And Oracle Spatial Studio is our self-service, no-code tool for taking advantage of those spatial features of the Oracle database without having to be a developer or without having to purchase or license any other tool or product. So to drill down on that sort of one level further, the main way people typically think about getting started with Oracle Spatial is to work with the data and the SQL API like you would with any other data. So for example, on the top here, we see an example of writing a query, a SQL query, that's identifying for an insurance company, for example, which of our policyholders addresses are located within 10 kilometers of a hurricane path, a predicted hurricane path. So just a basic proximity query, nothing fancy, nothing hard, but it is SQL. And on the bottom is, again, Spatial Studio, where we take that same capability and put it in the hands of people that aren't going to be bothered with needing to understand the SQL level interaction, but instead just use sort of a drag and drop approach to leveraging those same capabilities. So that's sort of the to get everyone oriented for what I'm really going to spend the whole rest of the session on, just showing things. What Oracle Spatial Studio is all about are these main points, and especially for today's session, I want to emphasize the fact that Oracle Spatial Studio, you can run Oracle Spatial Studio on the Oracle Cloud. I will mention at the outset that Oracle Spatial Studio is not at present a managed cloud service. Oracle Spatial Studio is a customer managed application, but as you'll see in a moment, it is easily deployable and something that you can run on the Oracle Cloud from the cloud marketplaces. I'll show in a moment. So cloud ready, and it supports the ability to let sort of non-technical users get spatial data, sort of access and prepare data for spatial analysis and mapping. It allows them to visualize their data on a map and do sort of this visual exploration of their data, perform ask all kinds of spatial questions, I'll put it that way, perform spatial analyses, which is really getting back to understanding the relationship between different data elements where there's no real relationship per se other than something like proximity or containment. And then finally, the work that you do in Spatial Studio is easily shared and integrated sort of outward, whether it's providing results to other users directly, or being able to programmatically integrate the work that you've done and the analyses you've done with other applications. So there is a role here for both business users and really developers to create assets that can then be integrated. So that's basically it for the the presentation portion here, and I want to really just get into showing things. So I'm going to jump over here and begin with just how Spatial Studio is. How do you get Spatial Studio installed, configured, ready to use? So first thing I want to mention, and well, the very first thing I want to mention is that there will be a set of resources, links provided at the end, and I think also on chat, so that the things that I'm going to show you, like this getting started page I'm going to show you right now, there's links for all this stuff that you can get back to have a look at your leisure. But as this Oracle Spatial Studio getting started page summarizes, there are several options for the way that Spatial Studio can be deployed. The first one that we list here is from the Oracle Cloud Marketplace. as just a application that can be deployed to the JE container that you maintain. That means that Oracle Spatial Studio can also be downloaded and deployed yourself outside of the Oracle Cloud. And there's also a sort of a self-contained, what we call a quick start kit that you can download and basically unzip and run just locally on your laptop as a sandbox. So there's these, several options for the way that you can get Spatial Studio up and running. But here I really want to focus on the cloud deployment. So with that, I'm just going to log in and show you how, if we just sort of get started here and jump over to the cloud marketplace and take a look at applications on the cloud marketplace, and then just search for, what do we have for Spatial? So you'll see there's actually 4 items under Spatial right now. 2 of them actually are Spatial Studio. You'll see here, the one that I'm, the third one over is just the one that we'd be focusing on here, just Oracle Spatial Studio. There is another marketplace listing for a version of Oracle Spatial Studio built for the edge computing. So that's sort of a separate build for a disconnected edge infrastructure. There's also a couple of other marketplace listings for spatial mid-tier products that are also very interesting, and maybe we'll be able to do another session like this for those products, dealing with network analysis and routing and toolkits for building custom applications. But we're focused on self-service with Oracle Spatial Studio. Now you also notice that each of these listings here, the price is free. So all these are no-cost apps that you have access to as long as you have Oracle Database. If you have a cloud plan or license for Oracle Database, you have access to these for free. They run on compute. So either you'd be running them, you could run them for a light sandbox on an always free shape, but generally you'd be subscribing to some compute, and then these are apps that are free that you can deploy. So just to take a look at Oracle Spatial Studio, what you will see here is the usual marketplace summary. So we have an overview with a whole bunch of links, and even links to sort of workshops and documentation of the step-by-step process that you'd be going through when you lay this down. And so all the usual marketplace details. You'll notice right now that the version that we have right now is 21.3. We have just released 22.1, and so this is going to be updated on the marketplace like just within the next couple of days. So what this looks like to deploy is, again, like any other marketplace application. So if I want to deploy this, I would give this deployment some optional name. I'd go next. I'll pick my availability domain and the shape that I want to use. This is an always free account, so I have micro. I'd supply I would either use secrets, vault secrets, or explicitly specify a password for the administrative user for Spatial Studio, and then basically run the stack. And what that ends up looking like is, because I've already done a couple of these, if I go over to Resource Manager, take a look at the stacks, you see that I've already done exactly that. So here's an example of a marketplace stack that I've built and run. And so running that stack to build my instance results in this job, which I did quite a while ago. And so once that runs, you will see a log that ultimately gives you all your great details. Most importantly, the URL for your Spatial Studio instance. So there's lots of details in the marketplace listing about more as needed as you are interested. But the upshot is that this marketplace listing just has a wizard with a few minimal items to specify, and you end up with a up and running Spatial Studio instance. Now, I mentioned that we're about to release or put our latest Spatial Studio version on the marketplace. Because once this is deployed, it's really just a customer managed app. You can actually go into an instance like this that you build, and if there's a patch or an upgrade, you can just, like any other app deployed to a compute instance, you can SSH in and update it, patch it as needed. So just very, very typical kind of life cycle for a customer managed app deployed from the marketplace. So with that said, we now have a Spatial Studio instance up and running. Now by default, right now, if I was to access this Spatial Studio instance, I would have a Spatial Studio login. And that would be sort of, using the JE container's own authentication. However, because we're on Oracle Cloud, what we really want to do to be sort of efficient with the way that we manage identity is that we want to integrate and tie together Spatial Studio with identity across our cloud environment. So what we do for that now, and this is actually one of the new features that we've introduced pretty recently, is the ability to have Oracle Spatial Studio participate in and be authenticated by Oracle Identity Cloud Service, so that it sort of shares identity with the rest of your OCI environment. So that configuration, I'm just going to jump over and sort of show a little bit about that setup. So if we jump over to Identity Federation, take a look at our Identity Cloud Services. This is my own, just free tier sandbox account. So like I'm the only user, but I am a user here. And if I jump over to my Identity Cloud Service, IDCS is the acronym. So if I take a look at the IDCS console here, we will see that I have a couple of Spatial Studio application instances that have been configured with this IDCS to serve as the single sign-on provider for Spatial Studio, so that it shares identity with the rest of my cloud account. So for example, if I come into the actual instance that I'm going to be using to demo for you in a moment, you see that I've got this instance of Spatial Studio with its configuration and all of the appropriate setup to have this IDCS instance register my Spatial Studio instance. And then there is a required group that is used, and I'm a member of that group, so that my user falling under this group will automatically be an SSO user for Spatial Studio. I could add additional groups that are non-administrative users, and basically the whole thing I'm showing right now is very nicely documented, and I believe that's also in the resources that we provide at the end of this session. But under administering Oracle Spatial Studio, there's a whole section on enabling IDCS as the identity provider. And I've shown you a bunch of it, but it's really just walks you through the whole thing. And then what happens, which is really swell, is that once that's been done, I can now come to like a new tab, and then if I go to Oracle Spatial Studio here, you notice I'm logged in. And I'm logged in because I've already logged in here to I've already authenticated with Oracle Cloud's SSO. So if I now log out of Spatial Studio, you'll see that where I'm taken to is not not Oracle Spatial Studio's own separate login. I'm taken automatically to my cloud accounts login. So to log back into Spatial Studio, I'm going to be signing in through my IDCS account. So the good news here is that Spatial Studio can really just sort of participate in the kind of the overall identity setup you have in Oracle Cloud. And so with that being said, now we can sort of jump in and start looking at what you can do and what the value is for you with Oracle Spatial Studio. So before I start showing you stuff, I just want to kind of introduce what the scenario is that I'm going to be kind of playing with as an example here. The scenario will be that I'm going to have two different pieces of data that I'll work with, and I've got them listed here, and I'll be explaining this tool and the user interface and what you're seeing in a moment. But just to sort of let you know what I'm going to be using as a scenario, we have a set of facility locations, which are just these points basically across the country. They are, they came from a set of EPA monitored facilities that have some sort of toxic substances that need to be monitored. And then I have a set of historical tornado paths. So those are lines that represent the paths of tornadoes for a 10-year period with information about the strength. And there's a couple of other data sets that we'll load and mess with. But fundamentally, what I want to do is use this scenario of looking at the relationship between these facilities and the history of big tornadoes as sort of, in a very quick cursory way, a way to sort of relate them. And remember what I said at the beginning, that a big point of spatial in general, never mind Studio as the tool, but the point of spatial is to be able to associate and relate information based on location and location relationships. And in this case, we want to associate and relate these monitored facilities with what the kind of the history and the profile of surrounding tornadoes looks like. And, in the 15-20 minutes of demos that I'll do, it's not an exhaustive scientifically sound analysis. I'm just going to use this as a sort of a scenario to demonstrate. So with that being said, now obviously being in Spatial Studio, it's worth taking a quick look at what we have available to us here. So to start with, I can expand the main navigation menu to always have a feel for, if I forget what icons mean, to see what each of these pages are all about. And sort of the way to think about it is as follows. We have a page for connections. This represents the Oracle databases, and in particular Oracle Autonomous databases, and that's all I'm using right now. Oracle Autonomous databases that I'm connected to and will use for being able to load data to be able to use for doing the backend analysis and everything. So I've got connections to Oracle Autonomous databases. From those databases, I have what we call data sets. And data sets are just references or pointers to data. And that data can be really one of two categories. It is either data in Oracle database, and I'll say more loosely, either data or analysis results from Oracle database, or it is data coming from some other format, and we have a growing number of those other formats, which I'll describe more in a moment. And so that's sort of what, all the analytical operations and the real heavy lifting that we do is based on working with data in Oracle database, but we also support being able to sort of consume and render for context data from other sources. So that's what data sets are. Projects those are the canvases where you do your work, where you visualize and analyze your data and save your results. And so this is your working environment. And then there's also a jobs page that lets us look at the status of ongoing processes. Like, for example, if we're going to geocode or determine the location of a huge number of addresses or place names, and we can let that run and monitor progress as it's going and look at past processes. And then administrative users have access to a page for all the sort of the requisite administrative activities, of which there are lots of different things going on here that administrators can do. Things like being able to configure and add your own custom background maps for all users to be able to see behind their data, look at logs, so on and so forth. So that's the lay of the land. Now, to begin with, I want to sort of demonstrate what you would do if you were actually get this deployed. It's on OCI. You obviously have no data to begin with. How do you just sort of get going and kick the tires? So the very first thing, well, of course, you'd start by creating connections to some database. And the database is either going to be an Oracle Autonomous database that will allow you to load the cloud wallet and proceed to pick the service and all the usual autonomous database stuff, or just a traditional database. So you can use either. We're doing everything here now with autonomous database. Once you have connections, then you can start to work with data. So to work with data, you create data sets. Those data sets, you've got a bunch of options here. Well, the first one I'll actually call out is if you already have data in your Oracle database, then you can use data from that database. Remember, we're not loading data to Spatial Studio. Spatial Studio is just a tool that is used to access data and leverage and invoke the features of the database. So we can have Spatial Studio take advantage of data from any of these connections. So for example, if I look at this demo data connection and see what's in it, we're going to see that there are, well, EPA TRI facility, that's a table that I've already connected to. Tornado paths, I already have a data set from that. But there's something here called TX for Texas sites. That's just a table. You'll notice where there's a pin, that means it's already spatial. There's already a geometry. It's spatial in the database. Where there's a little table icon, it's not. It's just a table. So here we have a table of some site locations. I'll create a data set from it. And you'll notice that I can use a different name for the data set than the table. And that's helpful because a data set name in Spatial Studio is just pointing to a table, but I can have a name that has spaces or begins with numbers or whatever I want, which can be convenient for sort of making things easier for users. I'll leave it alone for right now. Say okay. What you'll see is we now have a data set in Spatial Studio. It's going to tell me a couple things. First of all, I need to define a key column because there was no key in this data set to begin with. So I know that this is a unique column. But then now still there's no pin here. It's not spatial yet because this was just a table that that didn't have any geometries in it. If I take a look at this table, at its properties, I'll see that all it has is a bunch of address information, business name and address information. So in order to prepare this, if I have coordinates, I could create a coordinate index. If I have addresses, I can geocode. Yeah, I do have addresses I can geocode. So that warning told me that, but I can also get to that from saying prepare geocode addresses. And I'll do that, and the system will, Spatial Studio will automatically figure out which columns to use for address, state, city. And I could override that if I wanted to, but I'll just say, okay, I'm going to let that run. And I'll actually let that run in the background while I add some more data, because we can also load from files. So here I'm going to load one of the spatial formats called a shapefile, which is a common format for exchanging spatial data that has a coastal zone in it. And then I'll load a spreadsheet, which has some warehouse locations with coordinates. So I can load those as well. And I'll load those to my demo data connection. And I'll submit. So all I have is a name and a set of coordinates. And I'll submit that. Okay. So now what we can see is, well, first of all, remember the geocoding we did? I loaded the table of site locations, geocoded them. Well, that geocoding finished, and now there's a pin there. So that's awesome. Then we have this coastal zone. Well, it gave me kind of a funny name here. I'm not crazy about it. It's a little bit long. So let me just reduce the length of that name. And it's going to tell me that this one needs a key. I don't really need a key for that one anyway. And then we have these warehouses. And remember, the warehouses, this just has a warehouse name and a pair of coordinates. So we can also get this prepared for spatial simply by creating a coordinate index. And it figured out that lat is latitude, lon is longitude. So I'll let that run. And then I will just give this guy assign a key. So now I just brought in this one data set came from a table that had nothing but addresses. This came from a spatial format that's commonly used anytime people hand around data. It's usually either going to be shapefile or GeoJSON file. We support both. And then this had nothing but a warehouse name and a pair of coordinates. So now that we've done that and got those loaded, they're in the database, they're ready to use for visualization and analysis. I could start maybe by just taking those geocoded site locations. And remember, those just started as a table about a minute ago in the database. And so we've got our site locations. There's this coastal zone over here, and there's a bunch of warehouses. And then, of course, in Spatial Studio, from the visualization perspective, we have tremendous amount of flexibility to do really, whatever we want. And so from here, the sky's the limit. We'd be off and running and maybe asking all kinds of questions about proximity relationships and what's near what and what's contained by something. But mostly right now, I just wanted you to see that going from scratch, like spreadsheet, a shape file, maybe GeoJSON file, some tables in the database, going from there to having working spatial data in Spatial Studio is pretty straightforward. So that was just some data I wanted to use to show what it looks like to load. What I really want to use are those EPA facilities and the tornadoes that I mentioned, which were loaded exactly the same way that I just showed you. They were loaded from, well, if we say create data set again, here you see that we support GeoJSON. They were loaded from GeoJSON. And so I already have those loaded. Now there's a couple of other types of data sets that if I can get through this quickly enough, I'm going to show you towards the end where we support, these are some newer features. We support 3D data in a so-called Cesium format. And so instead of seeing a flat map, you'll see a sort of a spinning 3D globe with 3D data on it. And then data access directly from remote URLs that you never load. You just feed from a remote endpoint. And I want to get through stuff quickly enough and I'll be able to show you some of that as well. All right, so now just starting with the data that we're actually going to use to show a little bit more about exploration and how we would sort of visually explore our data before doing any analysis. I'm going to select my tornadoes, my facilities, and create a project. And I will start just by dropping the facilities onto the map. So these are all these EPA monitored facilities. But one of the first things I'm going to say is I'm going to want to focus not on the background sort of details. I want to focus on the data on top of the background. So I can change that background to different types, and I could even add my own if there's ones I want to use. But I'm going to use this so-called positron, which is sort of a subdued grayscale. I think that works nicely. And then what I want to do is to add my tornado paths, and then just sort of style them a little bit. So I'm going to put the tornadoes for a moment on top just by dragging and dropping. And then I'm going to go to settings, which is where we can control the look and feel of and the behavior of the data in the map. So I can do things like obviously just change the style, change the color of things, change the size of things, maybe make that a little more subdued and a little bit smaller. I can change the behavior so that I enable tooltips and info windows when I click on things and all kinds of stuff. So lots of flexibility there. But what I really want to do right now to explore here is look at these facilities and then sort of look at the strength of these tornadoes and see that over time. So one way to do that would be to go to the settings of our tornadoes and then say that instead of having a single color the way I have right now, I want to color these tornadoes based on data. And what I want to color them based on is their magnitude on the 0 to 5 scale. So now you can see that we're simply color coding these tornadoes, but these are all the tornadoes over a 10-year period, and we can start to maybe see where things are happening in the context of our facilities. But to visually explore this, it'd be nice to be able to step through time as we're doing this. And so another one of the not a brand new feature, but another one of the features that we added last year was was a time slider, so that you can sort of look at things over time if your data has a date in it, which the tornadoes do. The tornadoes do have a date. So I can go into the settings of my map, and here I could turn on lots of things. I could turn on navigation controls, scale bars, and so forth. But here I wanted to show a time slider. So if I turn on that time slider and configure it, I can say, what do I want this slider to control? I want it to control which tornadoes I see, and it's going to be based on the date of that event, and then what's the time unit of the slider. Do I want the slider to control hours, minutes, seconds, whatever? No, I want it to control years. So I'm seeing like a year's worth at a time. And I say, okay. And then now maybe what I'll do is sort of take these tornadoes to make it even more evident where they are. I could sort of make these a little thicker. And now I can just hit this play button. And you can see as I jump year to year to year, you can see these stylized tornadoes moving year by year. I can sort of see where things are. I can control the speed of this playback. But the other thing that I might want to do as a way to see what's going on is to, instead of using a time slice, just use a range. So now you can see as I'm modifying the time, I'm essentially just like filtering things. So we could do this with any data that includes date. But another thing that we can do similarly and do on any layers we want, whether they have a date or not, is to configure filters on what we see in the map. And so we could take any column and we could filter, and then we could be looking at a subset of facilities, et cetera, et cetera. So the more data sets that we add and the more that we sort of stylize and work with our data in terms of how we see it, you sort of have this visual exploration capability. I mean, there's a lot of other, don't have time to get to all of it, but there's also the ability to render points as clusters. So here we could see areas of concentration where each of these orange circles, which I could change to a different color if I want, represents a whole pile of facilities. And as I zoom in, these will explode out. It just gives me a different perspective and ability before doing any analysis to just visually explore our data. So, that's a reasonable place to start. But what we really want to get to is that analysis, because that's where the real power of the autonomous database in the back end kicks in. So let's just do some analysis. So basic example would be to do ask a proximity question. So I'm going to select one of those big tornadoes just beneath Memphis. And now I just want to ask a question about what facilities are in proximity of that. So I'm going to expand this again so I can see the analysis appear when I create it. And I'm going to create a new spatial analysis. And this now is really where we get into the power of Studio, because what we're seeing is sort of a depiction of all of the most commonly and some more specialized spatial operations that we have access to through self-service, whether it's doing spatial filters like we're going to do now, filter down to the facilities that are near a tornado, combining things together like aggregating a bunch of shapes into one, transforming things like starting with a shape and then returning the buffered area outward by a certain distance, different kinds of measurements and analytics that I'll get to in a moment. So let's do a filter example where I filter down all of the I'm going to filter my facilities. So I want to filter them down to only the ones near the tornado I selected. So I'm just going to say facility within distance, that's fine. What I want to use as a filter is that tornado path, the one that I selected. So I want to filter my facilities based on being within, and then let's say like 100 kilometers of that path. And then I'll run that analysis. It appears under analyses. I'll drag and drop it. And then I can style it to make sure that it's highly visible. So maybe what I'll do is I'll give it like yellow, and then I'll give it like a dark border and make it a little bigger. Lots of artistic license. So there we see a result within 100 kilometers. We've got our analysis right here. And if I want to do what if and treat this as sort of as a what if and what's within different distances, analyses like this you can adjust by going to their action menu and modifying parameters. So here I've got 100 kilometers. So what if I want this to be instead 200? So I'm going to run this, and now of course we're going to start to see more and more, and this will expand and contract as I adjust that threshold. This is a new feature that I'll mention in this release that we just came out with. This 22.1 release added the ability to do these modifications. Now for the developer types or the people that are curious about what's behind the scenes, I mean, you'll notice no coding to do this, but for people that want to use this as kind of a query builder and a way to build artifacts that can be used for other integrations, if we look at the properties of this analysis, we see, first of all, what the SQL is that Spatial Studio built for us. And you'll notice it has SDO within distance. And that's the spatial operator that sort of filters or searches for things based on proximity. So user didn't have to know or care about that to do what I did, but for the users that do care, because maybe you want to use this to build a basic example and then build on it to make it more sophisticated, it's visible. You could copy and paste this into database actions and see the same results. And we also have an endpoint to get results of any analysis through GeoJSON. So you could be building this analysis in Studio and then providing an endpoint to consume the results programmatically. And this GeoJSON is a standard format that all mapping tools will support. So if you have some other application in your organization that has maps in it, even if it's not using this same tool, but any standard mapping client can consume this. So it's really ready to integrate. I should mention that in addition to the maps, as we see here, you can add additional views of your data. For example, we could drop a table in here and look at facilities, and we can add additional maps. You can have multiple maps, et cetera, et cetera. So I'm just sort of focusing on one map right now, but you can have multiple tables and maps. And as I mentioned before, there's even this 3D spinning globe visualization for that 3D data, which hopefully I'll be able to get to. So that's basic, kind of like a hello world type analysis. Another example that's a little bit more interesting and powerful would be one of these analytic operations. So I'm going to get rid of the thing that we just did here. And now what I'd like to do is, instead of just looking at basic proximity, I want to do sort of an spatial analytic operation where I summarize for each of these facilities what's kind of the general summary context of tornado activity historically around that location. So one way to answer that would be to go back to spatial analyses, and this time go to analytics, where I can do some of these sort of aggregate and sort of operations that are more than just running a basic spatial query like we just did previously. So I'd like to summarize within distance, meaning I want to summarize the strength of tornadoes within the distance of every one of these facilities. So summarize within distance. I'm going to say for each of my facilities, I want to summarize within, and let's do 50 kilometers. So within 50 kilometers, I want to summarize tornadoes. And what I want to do is get the average magnitude. And the result I'll just call average. The result's going to be a new column, and I'll just let it be average. But here, again, it's a sort of a spatial analytic operation pushed to the database that'll summarize nearby tornado strength over time for each facility. So there's a little bit more involved in this one, but if I now drag and drop this guy in, and I will actually turn off these facilities. So now I just have, I've got my facilities, but you'll notice if we look at the attributes, there's a new one. We've basically enriched the facilities with this aggregate metric. And that's what I'd like to look at. I could look at it in a table. I could export it as data so that, other tools could use that data. But what I want to do is visualize it. So let's say that the color should now be based on data, and we're going to base it on that average strength. And then we'll go from 0 to 1.25. and we'll make 5 bins, and then we'll create a color ramp for that where we go from cool to warm. And then maybe I'll change this color a little because it's a little bit, whoops, that's not great. I'm not the best with the colors. You get the idea. Anyway, so the other thing I want to do now is I've got too many clashing colors because I still have all my tornado paths in red, so that's not a great way to see things. So let me come back here and make my palette instead of the reds for the tornadoes. I'll make those, I'll sort of subdue those a little to make them gray, and then I probably don't need them to be quite as thick anymore. And now zoom out. And you know, one can definitely question my color choices. I think my lime green was not so hot, not so great. But you get the idea that we now have really we're just color coding our facilities based on the kind of the regional context of historical tornado strength. And like the other analyses we saw, I could now come to this analysis and modify its parameters and say, instead of 50 kilometers, you know, maybe I want this to be 90. So what I'd be doing is effectively spreading the influence of, you know, to a greater distance and probably smoothing things a little more. And now the picture is going to be a little different. And I really kind of running out of time, but this is almost like step one of a pipeline where I might now say, you know, only for the ones that are red where the average is highest, maybe I want to lasso or generate sort of a surrounding shape that would be a high risk area, whatever we want to do. So this is really, you know, where we're now getting into the kind of the conversation with the data, asking all kinds of spatial questions. But in the interest of time, what I will do now is say, I can save my work, and I want to say, maybe I'll just call this project risk. And now that I've saved this project called risk, if I look back at my project page, you see now we have this new project here called risk. And if I go back to my risk project, I can also, and just to well, yeah, and then I could also come here and say I want to share this project so that it is so there's a read-only view of this project I could share as a URL so that other users in my org can access it. If we go back here now, you'll see under published projects, there's a view of that project with the URL, and I could now share this with others. We already saw how the analyses I do can be integrated programmatically. If we go back to our data sets, you'll notice that the analyses I created are all now listed here under data set. So for example, that within distance here, if I look at its properties, same thing we saw before. Here's that within distance analysis with the within distance operator with its endpoint. So there's the published project way of sharing. There's the GeoJSON endpoint. There's the SQL that I can access. And there's also, which I don't, really no time for right now, but there's a whole REST interface for the operations you do in Studio to be able to sort of operationalize this stuff. Now, in the last minute or so before I want to stop for questions, I do want to reinforce that when it comes to creating data sets, we can do more. We can add these 3D data sets. We can add data from an external URL, and I'll add one of those right now. So this is really important because there are occasions where there's data that's valuable for context that is available from some endpoint, but you don't want to go to the trouble of physically loading. You don't need to manage it. You just want to view it. So here's an endpoint that has parks and protected lands that might be interesting. And so I'm going to submit that. And now I haven't loaded any data. I just have reference to an endpoint. So I could come back to my project and I could add that to my project, and then I could drag and drop it onto the map. And now, of course, you're going to see that I have, you're going to see, and I should try to do it in a color that's not exactly like everything else that's on the map, but you can see that I've got these new areas right here that I can turn on and off that are in context with the rest of my analysis that are just being streamed by an external resource. Now, I don't have time to show all the 3D stuff and a bunch of other things, because this was really an attempt to give folks an overview of the value of Spatial Studio for being able to take advantage of the spatial features of autonomous database, do it all on the cloud, and sort of provide that sort of jump start for taking advantage of those features. So jumping back to my slides here, we've really seen all this stuff. And the takeaways, the things I really want people to hopefully come away with is the fact that, as we started with, this is all running on Oracle Cloud using your IDC Oracle Identity Cloud Service authentication should you choose to do so. You can also run a sandbox on your laptop in your own data center on basically any environment you want that has access to Oracle database. The ability to get data to access and get data prepared for Studio is really nice to avoid all the traditional sort of coding and integration with geocoding services and other things you'd normally have to do to get your data ready. It's all just ready to go in Studio. The ability to explore and ask spatial questions of your data without needing to know all the underlying technical details, and then ultimately being able to share what you've done with others in a bunch of different ways. So I think at this point, I want to stop for what should have been 15 minutes of questions. There's now like 5 minutes of questions and a poll. So I'm gonna leave it there, and I'm gonna leave it there and ask Kenna if she wants to jump back in to open it up for questions.
Yeah, I think there have been some questions that folks have been answering throughout. So it might be worth taking a look and seeing if you want to add anything to those.
Sure.
And I've put up the poll, as you mentioned, so folks are already filling that out. Thank you for that.
Okay, I do see.
Our team has been hard at work answering questions throughout the process.
Yep, I was blissfully ignorant of that whole activity. Okay, yeah, it looks like things have been answered, and I don't see any open questions, so we may be good. I guess if there's a final minute, maybe and no other questions, I probably can show an example of that nice 3D thing because it's pretty cool.
Yeah.
So one of the other types of data, we looked at getting at data from tables, we uploaded data, we did a GeoJSON URL, but we can also load data from these various Cesium formats, which is 3D format. And CZML is a 3D time series format, and we can load from that format. And so I've got some examples, and satellites are a typical example of something that shows well in that context. So I'm going to load one of these CZML files, and here we have satellite activity, a whole bunch of satellites for a particular day. I'll say okay, and now I've got this new data set, so I'm going to create a new project with that data. I'll discard my changes, and now you see that when I have a project where I've loaded Cesium data, we have a different sort of map. So instead of our basic map, we have a Cesium map, which is this 3D zoomable globe. If I go back to data and drag and drop the Cesium data, you can see that now, instead of just flat data, we're looking at a spinning globe with 3D data. And that data, CZML, the CZML format is actually data that is spatio-temporal. So you see things moving. And that's kind of the idea here with CZML. So, this could be for things like satellites. It could be for things like, vehicles, ships, what have you. So that's one nice way that we have of working with spatio-temporal data. And this is configurable so that we could be filtering which satellites we're seeing and styling and so forth. And then one other really neat way in the last minute that I have, and literally just need 1 minute for this, is
is another new feature, which is another. So this that I'm showing you now with this Cesium 3D globe is a way of viewing existing 3D data from this CZML, which is a common format for this type of data. But it's existing data that you load and then render. Now we also have the ability to render real-time data streaming from a source being captured by Oracle database, and that's what this example is going to show. So we have in this case a set of boat data that's being continually streamed every second into the database, like from a Kafka stream with boat positions. So I can create a data set with those boat locations that have been configured as spatiotemporal. And now when we look at them, we see the last position of those boats. And in order to get them moving, if we go to the animation configuration, we can tell it to start polling the database, getting constant updates based on that data feed every second, and then configure the style of them. So in this case, we're going to style based on colors so that each boat has a distinct color for the boat and the trail, where the trail is configurable, how long of a trail you want based on time. This is, again, this could be boats, vehicles, it could be any data that has position and being constantly streamed to the database, as is so common now in so many different scenarios. But as you can see, this is sort of real-time animated feature movement on the map based on data streaming in the data to the database. This is another one of the new features that is just now released with this 22 version. So I've tried to call out a few times where things that I've shown are new, and this is definitely one of them. And I think that brings us to the top of the hour, Kenneth. So I think we've hit our time slot.
Excellent. Thank you. This is a very cool little thing at the end to end on too. That looks really neat. I'm going to launch one final poll for the folks who are with us, just our standard feedback poll, which we'd love to hear from you. And then big thanks to you, David, for joining us and taking us through Spatial Studio and all of the cool features, or some of the cool features, because I know there's a whole bunch more. And I was monitoring some of the chat and Q&A, and it looks like there was a lot of interest for future sessions and deep dives into aspects of this. So lots of very cool stuff to check out. I've shared some of the resources that David mentioned at the beginning in chat, and you'll also be getting it in a follow-up email as well. So there'll be links to all of the things that David was showing you, and some more resources to dig into some of this information as well, as you either start or continue your spatial data journey. So thank you so much, David, for presenting here. Thanks to LJ and Alima and Jayat for supporting and answering all those questions. And thank you to our audience for sticking around and joining us for this presentation. And we hope to see you next time on a future event. Thanks so much. Have a great rest of your day, everybody.